The morning shift at the Grand Continental Hotel started like any other Tuesday. The lobby gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and the marble floors reflected the early sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Rosa had been working as a housekeeper there for almost 3 years now, and she knew every corner of that building like the back of her hand. She pushed her cleaning cart down the hallway of the 7th floor, her mind already planning out the 12 rooms she needed to finish before lunch. The cartwheels squeaked slightly, a familiar sound that had become part of her daily routine. Room 701, 702, 703. She knocked on each door, waited for a response, and when there was none, she'd slip inside to begin her work. Rosa had always been good at her job. She took pride in the way she could transform a messy room into a spotless sanctuary in under 30 minutes. Fresh sheets, fluffed pillows, sparkling bathroom fixtures. Every detail mattered. Her supervisor often praised her efficiency, though the pay raise she'd been promised kept getting pushed back month after month. The thing about working in a luxury hotel is that you become invisible. Guests would walk right past her in the hallway, talking on their phones, discussing business deals worth millions, completely unaware of her presence. She'd learned to move quietly, to blend into the background. It was easier that way. Today felt different, though. There was a tension in the air she couldn't quite place. The manager had been running around all morning, barking orders at everyone, making sure every single detail was perfect. Apparently, some very important guest had checked in late last night. Someone who owned properties across Europe and had very specific expectations. Rosa didn't pay much attention to guest names or their backgrounds. Rich people came and went constantly. What difference did it make to her whether someone owned one company or 20? They all left the same messes behind. Towels on the floor, beds unmade, room service trays forgotten on desks. She was halfway through room 708 when her radio crackled to life. It was dispatch calling all available staff. There was a situation on the 12th floor, the penthouse level, and they needed someone who could handle a delicate matter. Rosa's supervisor came through on the radio asking specifically for her. That was unusual. The penthouse suites had their own dedicated staff, people who were trained specifically to handle high-profile guests. Rosa had only been up there a handful of times in 3 years, usually when someone called in sick or during particularly busy periods. She finished up quickly in room 708 and made her way to the service elevator. The ride up felt longer than usual. When the doors opened on the 12th floor, she was greeted by her supervisor, who looked more stressed than she'd ever seen him. He explained the situation quickly. The guest in the penthouse suite had requested someone to clean his room, but his previous housekeeper had quit on the spot an hour ago. Apparently, he was extremely particular about how things were done, and the last housekeeper couldn't handle his constant requests for adjustments. They needed someone patient, someone reliable. Rosa fit that description. She nodded and gathered her supplies. The penthouse hallway was different from the regular floors. Thicker carpet, original artwork on the walls, fewer rooms, but each one massive. She found the suite at the end of the hall and knocked firmly 3 times. A voice called out from inside, but she couldn't make out the words. She knocked again and announced herself clearly. Housekeeping. The door opened and she found herself face to face with a man in his late 50s, wearing an expensive suit despite it being only 9 in the morning. His hair was silver at the temples, and he had the kind of presence that comes from years of being in charge of everything and everyone around him. He looked her up and down briefly, then stepped aside to let her in. The suite was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the entire city. There was a full living room, a dining area, what looked like a study off to one side, and through an open doorway she could see a bedroom bigger than her entire apartment. The man walked over to the windows and stood there with his hands clasped behind his back. He began speaking, and Rosa started to gather the towels from the bathroom. That's when she realized he wasn't speaking English. The word sounded foreign, Germanic maybe, but she couldn't be sure. She continued working, assuming he was on a phone call or maybe talking to himself. Some guests did that. Rich people had their quirks, and it wasn't her place to question them. She stripped the bed, replaced the sheets, and moved on to the bathroom. But then he spoke again, louder this time, and she realized he was talking to her. She turned around and he was looking directly at her with an expectant expression. She had no idea what he'd said. "I'm sorry, sir," she said politely. "I don't understand." He frowned slightly and repeated himself, this time speaking slower, but still in that same foreign language. The frustration was starting to show on his face. Rosa felt her heart rate pick up. This was exactly the kind of situation that could get her in trouble. If she couldn't understand a guest's requests, if she somehow offended him or failed to meet his expectations, it could cost her this job. And she needed this job desperately. She was about to call her supervisor when something clicked in her memory. The sounds, the rhythm of the words. She'd heard this language before. Years ago, back home, there had been a family in her neighborhood who'd moved from the Netherlands. They'd spoken Dutch, and while Rosa had never learned the language properly, she'd picked up a few words and phrases from playing with their daughter as a child. The man was speaking Dutch. She stood there for a moment, her mind racing. Should she try to respond? She only knew a handful of words, basic things, but maybe it would be enough to show him she was trying, that she respected him enough to make an effort. Taking a breath, she responded in Dutch with one of the few phrases she remembered. It was simple, something like acknowledging what he'd said and asking him to speak slowly. The change in his expression was immediate. His eyebrows shot up in surprise, and for the first time since she'd entered the room, he actually looked at her. Really looked at her. Not through her, not past her, but at her. He responded in Dutch again, and this time Rosa caught a few words. He was asking about her background, where she'd learned the language. She explained in her broken Dutch mixed with English that she'd known a family from the Netherlands as a child, that she only knew a little bit, and she apologized for not being fluent. What happened next surprised her even more. He smiled. Not a polite hotel guest smile, but a genuine expression of pleasure. He switched to English, though his accent was thick. "You are the first person in this hotel who has tried to speak my language," he said. "Do you know how rare that is?" Rosa wasn't sure how to respond. She just nodded and continued with her work, but something had shifted in the room. The atmosphere felt different, less formal somehow. He began talking to her as she cleaned, asking questions about her life, her work, how long she'd been in the country. Most guests never bothered with such things. To them, housekeepers were part of the furniture, necessary but unremarkable. She answered politely but kept working, conscious of the time. She still had 6 more rooms to finish on the lower floors, and she couldn't afford to fall behind schedule. But he seemed genuinely interested in her responses, nodding thoughtfully as she spoke. When she finished and prepared to leave, he stopped her at the door. "What is your name?" he asked. "Rosa, sir." He nodded slowly as if committing it to memory. "Thank you, Rosa. You have made my morning considerably better." She smiled politely and left, pushing her cart back to the service elevator. It had been a strange interaction, but not unpleasant. She'd dealt with far more difficult guests. The rest of Rosa's day passed in the usual blur of cleaning supplies and freshly laundered sheets. She finished her rounds on the lower floors, restocked her cart, and was preparing to clock out when her supervisor approached her again. He had that same stressed look from earlier, maybe even worse now. "Rosa, the gentleman in the penthouse suite has requested you specifically for the duration of his stay," he said, pulling out his tablet to show her the work order. "He's extended his reservation for 2 weeks. You'll be assigned to him exclusively during that time." 2 weeks of penthouse duty meant 2 weeks of not having to rush through 12 rooms a day. It meant better tips, potentially. But it also meant dealing with a guest who clearly had high expectations, and that could go either way. "Did he say why he requested me?" she asked. Her supervisor shrugged. "Just said you were the only one who got things right. Take it as a compliment. This kind of guest, if you keep him happy, he could mention you to management. Might finally get you that raise." Rosa nodded and headed home for the evening. Her apartment was a 30-minute bus ride from the hotel, in a neighborhood where the buildings were old and the streets were loud. She shared the 2-bedroom place with her younger sister and her sister's baby. Money was always tight, stretched between rent, utilities, food, and her sister's medical bills. That night, as she heated up leftover rice and beans, her sister asked about work. Rosa told her about the Dutch businessman, about the strange conversation, about the 2-week assignment. "That's good, isn't it?" her sister said, bouncing the baby on her knee. "Maybe he'll tip well." "Maybe," Rosa said, though she'd learned not to get her hopes up. Rich people were unpredictable. Some tipped generously, others left nothing at all despite staying in $1,000-a-night suites. The next morning, Rosa arrived at the hotel an hour earlier than usual. Penthouse guests often wanted their rooms serviced at specific times, and she wanted to check in with the front desk about his preferences. The night manager told her he'd requested cleaning at 10 in the morning, no earlier, no later. At exactly 10, Rosa knocked on the penthouse door. The businessman answered quickly, already dressed for the day in another impeccable suit. He greeted her in Dutch, then immediately switched to English. "Good morning, Rosa. Please come in. I have a meeting in an hour, but I wanted to discuss something with you first." This was unusual. Guests didn't typically want to discuss anything with housekeeping staff. They left notes or called the front desk with requests, but direct conversations were rare. He gestured for her to sit in one of the living room chairs. She hesitated, uncomfortable with the informality, but he insisted. She perched on the edge of the seat while he sat across from her. "I want to apologize for yesterday," he began. "I was testing the staff here, and I realize now that wasn't fair. You see, I've stayed in hundreds of hotels across dozens of countries, and I've found that the way staff treat guests when they don't speak English tells you a lot about a place." Rosa listened, unsure where this was going. Most people, when faced with a language barrier, become frustrated or dismissive, he continued. "But you tried. You made an effort with the little Dutch you knew. That tells me something about your character." She didn't know what to say to that, so she simply nodded. "I'm here on business," he explained. "I'm considering investing in several properties in this city. Part of my evaluation process involves understanding the people who work in service industries here, their work ethic, their attitudes, their treatment of others. You'd be surprised how much you can learn about a place by talking to the people who keep it running." Rosa was starting to feel uncomfortable. This felt less like a guest conversation and more like an interview of some kind. "I'd like to ask you some questions over the next 2 weeks," he said, "about your work, about this city, about your experiences. In exchange, I'll ensure you're compensated well for your time and insights. Does that sound acceptable?" She thought about it for a moment. It seemed odd but not dangerous, and if he was willing to pay for conversation, well, she could use the money. "Yes, sir," she said finally. "That's acceptable." He smiled and stood up. "Excellent. Now I really do need you to clean this room because I have guests coming this evening. But tomorrow, perhaps we could talk while you work." From that day forward, their morning conversations became routine. Rosa would arrive at 10, begin her work, and he would ask questions. At first they were simple things. How long had she lived in the city? What did she think of the neighborhood where the hotel was located? What were the biggest challenges facing working people here? She answered honestly, though carefully. She'd heard stories of staff getting fired for complaining to guests about wages or working conditions, but he seemed genuinely interested, taking notes on a small leather journal he always carried. As the days passed, his questions became more specific. He asked about healthcare, about education, about housing costs. He asked what she would change about the city if she could. What did she think the community needed most? Rosa found herself opening up more than she'd intended. She told him about her sister's medical debt, about how one emergency room visit had cost them 6 months of savings. She told him about the schools in her neighborhood, how they were underfunded and overcrowded. She told him about her neighbors, the elderly couple who couldn't afford their medications, the single father working 3 jobs to keep his kids fed. He listened to everything, writing occasionally in his journal, asking follow-up questions that showed he was really paying attention. On the 5th day, he asked her something different. "Rosa, if you could do any job in the world, what would it be?" She paused in the middle of making the bed. No one had ever asked her that before. The question felt almost absurd. People like her didn't get to choose their jobs based on what they wanted to do. They chose based on what was available, what paid enough to survive. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I've never really thought about it." "Think about it now," he encouraged. "Money is no object, education is no barrier. What would you do?" She thought for a long moment, her hands smoothing the crisp white sheets. "I think I'd like to work with families," she said slowly. "Helping them navigate the system, you know? So many people don't know what resources are available, what programs they qualify for. They struggle because they don't know where to turn. I'd like to be someone who could guide them, help them find solutions." He nodded, writing in his journal. "That's a noble aspiration. What's stopping you?" She almost laughed. "Everything. Time, money, education. I work 6 days a week just to keep food on the table. I don't have the luxury of going back to school or training for something else. What if those barriers were removed? He pressed. What if someone invested in your education, gave you the time and resources to pursue that path? Then I guess I'd have to be very grateful to that someone, she said, but her tone was light, almost joking. This was fantasy talk, the kind of conversation that went nowhere. He didn't pursue it further that day, but she noticed he seemed pleased with her answer. The weekend came and the hotel was busier than usual. There was a wedding in the main ballroom, a corporate event in the conference center, every room booked solid. Rosa was grateful for her penthouse assignment. Away from the chaos of the lower floors, the businessman, whose name she'd learned was Mr. Vanderberg, was gone most of Saturday, returning late in the evening. But Sunday morning he was there as usual for their conversation. "I've been thinking about what you said," he told her, "about helping families navigate systems. Do you know what I do for a living, Rosa?" She shook her head. She'd assumed real estate or finance, something like that. "I invest in communities," he said. "Not just buildings or businesses, but in the people who make those communities work. I look for places where strategic investment could make a real difference. And then I look for people who could lead those initiatives." Rosa continued, dusting the bookshelf. "Listening. I've been visiting this city for 3 months now," he continued. "I've met with politicians, with business leaders, with community organizers. Everyone has told me what they think I want to hear. Statistics, projections, promises. But very few people have told me the truth about what's really needed here." He paused, and she turned to look at him. "You've told me the truth, Rosa, every day this week. You've given me insights that no consultant or politician could provide. You've shown me where the real gaps are, where resources are needed most." She didn't know what to say to that, so she went back to her work. "I'd like to make you an offer," he said. Rosa stopped what she was doing and turned to face Mr. Vanderberg completely. Her heart was beating faster, though she wasn't sure why. Offers from wealthy guests usually meant extra work for extra tips, nothing more. "I'm establishing a community development foundation here in the city," he said, setting down his coffee cup. "The goal is to provide resources, education, and support to underserved neighborhoods. We'll need someone to direct the Family Services Division, someone who understands the real challenges people face, not someone with a fancy degree who's never struggled a day in their life." Rosa felt her mouth go dry. She gripped the duster in her hand a little tighter. "I'd like you to consider taking that position," he continued. "The foundation would pay for any education or training you need. We'd start you at a salary 3 times what you're making now, with full benefits for you and your family. You'd have a team working under you, real resources to make a difference." For a moment, Rosa couldn't speak. This had to be some kind of joke or a test or something. People didn't just offer life-changing opportunities to hotel housekeepers they'd known for less than a week. "Mr. Vanderberg," she said slowly, "I appreciate whatever this is, but I'm not qualified for something like that. I don't have a college degree. I don't have experience running anything." "You have something more valuable than a degree," he countered. "You have lived experience. You understand the problems because you faced them yourself. And from our conversations this week, I can tell you have the intelligence and compassion needed to help others effectively." Rosa shook her head. "Sir, with respect, you don't know me." "Not really. We've had some nice conversations. But that doesn't mean I'm capable of running a program or managing people or whatever this job would involve." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city. "You're right that I don't know everything about you. But I've built a career on reading people, on identifying potential. I didn't become successful by making safe, conventional choices." He turned back to her. "I'm not asking you to decide right now. My original 2-week stay is ending in 4 days. I'm extending it another week. Take that time to think about it. Research the foundation if you'd like. I'll provide you with all the information you need." Rosa nodded slowly, her mind spinning. This was too much to process while standing in a hotel suite holding cleaning supplies. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course. Why me? Really, you could hire someone with experience, with credentials. Why would you take a chance on someone like me?" He smiled slightly. "Because people with credentials and experience also have fixed ways of thinking. They know what's supposed to work, what the best practices are. But often those approaches fail because they're designed by people who don't actually understand the communities they're trying to help." He picked up his journal and flipped through a few pages. "Every insight you've given me this week has been practical, grounded in reality. You told me about the elderly couple who can't afford medication. Do you know what a healthcare consultant would have told me? Statistics about senior poverty rates and Medicare gaps. Useful data, but it doesn't capture the human element of an old man choosing between his heart medication and his rent. Rosa felt her eyes getting warm. She knew that old man. He lived 2 floors below her. Change doesn't come from people at the top telling people at the bottom what they need, Mr. Vanderberg continued. It comes from people who understand the struggle being given the resources to address it. That's what I'm offering you. Resources, support, and the freedom to use your judgment to help your community. After he left for his business meetings, Rosa sat down in one of the penthouse chairs. She wasn't supposed to sit in guest furniture, but her legs felt weak. She pulled out her phone and stared at it for a long moment before calling her sister. "You need to come home for lunch," Rosa said when her sister answered. "We need to talk." That evening, Rosa and her sister sat at their small kitchen table with the baby asleep in the next room. Rosa had explained everything twice, and her sister still looked shocked. "This is insane," her sister said. "This doesn't happen to people like us." "I know. But if it's real, Rosa, if this is actually real, you have to take it." "What if I fail?" Rosa asked quietly. "What if I take this job and I'm terrible at it? What if I let people down?" Her sister reached across the table and grabbed her hand. "You spend every day working harder than anyone I know. You take care of me and the baby even though you don't have to. You help our neighbors even when we can barely help ourselves. You're not going to fail." Rosa wanted to believe that, but doubt gnawed at her. She'd spent her entire adult life in service jobs. Cleaning, cooking, childcare. Honest work, but not the kind of work that prepared you to run programs and manage budgets. The next morning, she arrived at the penthouse at the usual time. Mr. Vanderberg was waiting with a folder full of documents. Information about the foundation, its mission statement, financial reports, letters from community leaders who'd already agreed to partner with the initiative. "I'm not trying to pressure you," he said, handing her the folder, "but I want you to have all the information you need to make an informed decision." Over the next few days, Rosa read through everything during her breaks and after work. The foundation was legitimate. Mr. Vanderberg had established similar organizations in 3 other cities, all of them successful. She found news articles about their work, testimonials from people they'd helped. She also found information about Mr. Vanderberg himself. He'd grown up poor in the Netherlands, the son of a cleaning woman and a factory worker. He'd built his fortune from nothing, and now he spent half his time giving it away strategically, investing in communities the way others invested in stocks. On her second to last day of his extended stay, Rosa came to the penthouse with her decision made. But before she could say anything, he spoke first. "I need to be honest with you about something," he said, and his tone was more serious than she'd heard before. "This opportunity comes with challenges. There will be people who doubt you, who question your qualifications. You'll face criticism from those who think this position should have gone to someone with more traditional credentials." He paused. "There will also be people who resent you for succeeding, who can't celebrate your achievement because it highlights their own missed opportunities. You need to be prepared for that." Rosa nodded. She'd already thought about this. She knew how people talked. "But here's what I believe," he continued. "I believe you have something those traditionally qualified candidates don't have. You have authenticity. When you walk into a struggling family's home and tell them you understand what they're going through, you're not pretending. You've been there. That credibility is invaluable." "I want to say yes," Rosa said finally. "But I need to know this is real. I need to know you're not going to change your mind next week when you realize I don't know what a strategic plan is, or how to write a grant proposal." He smiled. "We have people who know those things. We have accountants and lawyers and grant writers. What we don't have is someone who can look a struggling mother in the eye and see herself. Someone who knows exactly which questions to ask because she's had to answer them herself." "Then yes," Rosa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I'll do it." The relief and excitement on his face was genuine. He stood and extended his hand, and she shook it, feeling like she was signing some kind of invisible contract that would change everything. "There's one more thing," he said. "I'd like you to give your notice at the hotel as soon as possible. The foundation needs to start hiring staff, and I want you involved in those decisions. You'll know better than anyone what kind of team we need." Rosa felt panic rise in her chest. "I can't just quit. I have bills due next week and my sister's medication and—" Your first month's salary will be paid in advance, he interrupted gently. And the foundation will cover your family's medical expenses going forward. I should have mentioned that earlier. I'm sorry. That night, Rosa barely slept. She kept waiting to wake up and find out this was all a dream. But morning came and it was still real. She wrote her resignation letter during breakfast, her hand shaking slightly as she signed her name. Her supervisor was shocked when she handed it in. Rosa, what happened? Did someone say something to you? If there's a problem, we can work it out. No problem, she assured him. I've been offered another opportunity. He looked skeptical. Another hotel? No, something different. Word spread quickly through the hotel staff. By lunchtime, everyone knew Rosa was leaving. Some people congratulated her. Others asked suspicious questions. Where was she going? Who had offered her this job? Was it that penthouse guest? Rosa kept her answers vague. It didn't feel real enough yet to talk about openly. Rosa's final day at the Grand Continental Hotel felt surreal. She went through her usual routine one last time, pushing her cart down familiar hallways, cleaning rooms she'd cleaned hundreds of times before. But everything felt different now. Like she was already halfway out the door even though her shift wouldn't end for another 6 hours. Several co-workers pulled her aside throughout the day, wanting to know more about her new job. She told them what she could, that she'd be working for a community organization helping families access resources. Most people seemed genuinely happy for her, though she caught a few skeptical looks and whispered conversations that stopped when she walked by. Mr. Vanderberg had checked out that morning, but he'd left an envelope for her at the front desk. Inside was a check for her first month's salary, just as he'd promised, along with a note containing an address and a time to meet the following Monday. The foundation's office space, he'd written, was still being set up, but the core team would be there to meet her. When Rosa got home that evening, she sat on her bed and stared at the check for a long time. The amount was more money than she'd ever seen in one place, more than she'd made in the past 4 months combined. She took a picture of it and sent it to her sister, who was at work, with a simple message. It's real. Her phone rang 30 seconds later. Rosa. Her sister's voice was shaking. Rosa, this is real money. This is actual real money. I know. You could pay off my medical debt. You could fix the car. I could do a lot of things, Rosa interrupted gently. And we will. But first I need to make sure I can actually do this job. The weekend passed in a blur of nervous preparation. Rosa had bought a simple professional outfit. Nothing fancy, but better than anything in her current wardrobe. She practiced introducing herself in the mirror, feeling ridiculous but doing it anyway. She read through all the foundation documents again, taking notes, trying to memorize names and programs and goals. Monday morning arrived with gray skies and the threat of rain. Rosa took 2 buses to reach the address Mr. Vanderberg had given her. The building was in a transitional neighborhood, not wealthy but not struggling either. The kind of place that could go either way depending on what kind of investment came in. The foundation's office was on the 3rd floor of a renovated warehouse. The space was large and mostly empty, with only a few desks set up and boxes stacked along the walls. 3 people were there when Rosa arrived, all of them looking up as she walked through the door. A woman in her 40s approached first, extending her hand with a warm smile. You must be Rosa. I'm Patricia, Director of Operations. Mr. Vanderberg has told us so much about you. Rosa shook her hand, trying not to show how nervous she felt. The other 2 introduced themselves as well. Daniel, who would handle finance and grants, and Lisa, who was in charge of volunteer coordination and community outreach. They all seemed nice enough, professional but friendly. Patricia gave Rosa a tour of the space, showing her where her office would be once the furniture arrived, explaining the layout they had planned. We're starting small, Patricia explained. Right now, it's just the 4 of us and Mr. Vanderberg, though he's based in Europe most of the time. Over the next 3 months, we'll be hiring a full team, support staff, caseworkers, educational specialists. Your input on those hires will be crucial. They spent the morning in what Patricia called a visioning session. Each of them talked about their background, their goals for the foundation, their understanding of the community's needs. When it was Rosa's turn, she felt her palms start to sweat. I'm not going to pretend I have the same kind of experience as the rest of you, she started, and immediately worried that was the wrong way to begin. But I've lived in this city my whole life. I've worked in service industries and hospitality and childcare. I've been the person calling for help and not knowing where to turn. I've watched my neighbors struggle with the same problems year after year because the systems that are supposed to help them are too complicated or too inaccessible. She paused, gaining confidence as she spoke. I think what this community needs most is someone who can translate between the resources that exist and the people who need them. There are programs out there, funding available, but people don't know how to access them. The paperwork is confusing. The offices are only open during work hours. And if you don't have internet or transportation, you're just out of luck. Daniel was nodding. That's exactly the gap we need to fill. The infrastructure exists, but the connection points are broken. They spent the next several hours going through the Foundation's initial programs. Emergency financial assistance for families facing eviction or utility shutoffs. A medical advocacy program to help people navigate insurance and hospital billing. Educational support for adults wanting to finish their degrees or learn new skills. Rosa found herself contributing more than she'd expected. When they discussed the emergency assistance program, she suggested they partner with local churches and community centers to do outreach, since those were the places people already gathered and trusted. When they talked about the medical advocacy program, she pointed out that many people would need childcare in order to attend appointments with advocates, so they should budget for that. By the end of the day, her head was spinning with information, but she also felt something she hadn't expected. Excitement. This could actually work. These programs could actually help people. Over the next few weeks, Rosa threw herself into the work. She spent her days in meetings, on phone calls, visiting community centers and social service agencies. She met with hospital administrators, school principals, neighborhood association leaders. She listened to their concerns, their ideas, their warnings about what had been tried before and failed. At night, she went home exhausted but energized. Her sister noticed the change in her. "You're different," she said one evening while they were making dinner together. "You seem, I don't know, more alive somehow." Rosa thought about that. "I think I just never realized how much I needed to feel like what I was doing mattered. Cleaning hotel rooms is honest work. And I was good at it, but at the end of the day, I was just making things temporarily nice for people who had more money than I'd ever see. This feels different. This feels like it could actually change things." But it wasn't all smooth. There were challenges Rosa hadn't anticipated. In one community meeting, a social worker openly questioned her qualifications, asking pointed questions about her education and background. Rosa had to stand there and admit she didn't have a degree in social work or public policy, that her expertise came from lived experience, not academic study. "And that's supposed to be enough?" the social worker had asked, her tone skeptical. Patricia had stepped in then, defending Rosa's role and explaining the Foundation's philosophy. But Rosa went home that night feeling shaken, wondering if that social worker was right to doubt her. Mr. Vanderberg called the next day, as if he'd sensed the problem. He was in Amsterdam but had time to talk. "Patricia told me what happened," he said. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," Rosa said, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. "You're going to face more of that," he said bluntly. "People with degrees and credentials don't like being told that someone without those things might be better suited for a job. It threatens their sense of how the world should work." "Maybe they're right, though," Rosa said quietly. "Maybe I should go back to school, get some kind of degree before I try to do this." "Rosa," his voice was firm. "I've worked with dozens of social workers and community organizers over the years. I've seen people with PhDs design programs that look perfect on paper and fail completely in practice because they didn't understand the people they were trying to help. And I've seen people like you. People who understand the problems from the inside create simple, practical solutions that actually work." He paused. "The Foundation will pay for you to take classes if you want to. Professional development, management training, whatever you feel would help you do your job better. But don't let anyone convince you that a piece of paper is more valuable than your lived experience and your natural ability to connect with people." Rosa felt tears pricking her eyes. She blinked them back. "Thank you," she managed to say. "Don't thank me yet," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Wait until you see how hard I'm going to work you over the next year." The Foundation's first major program launched 6 weeks after Rosa started. It was a pilot initiative offering emergency financial assistance to 50 families facing eviction. The application process was simple, just 2 pages and a phone interview. No credit checks, no invasive documentation requirements, just a straightforward assessment of need and a quick turnaround. Rosa had fought for that simplicity. She'd sat in meetings where lawyers and accountants wanted to add more safeguards, more verification steps, more ways to prevent fraud. She understood their concerns, but she also knew that every extra step, every additional document requirement, was another barrier that would prevent the people who needed help most from accessing it. "We're going to get scammed sometimes," she'd said in one particularly tense meeting. "Someone is going to lie about their situation and get money they don't strictly need. That's going to happen. But if we build our system around preventing that rare case, we'll also prevent 90% of legitimate cases from getting help because the process is too hard to navigate." Patricia had backed her up, and eventually, they'd agreed to keep the process simple with the understanding that they'd monitor for abuse and adjust if necessary. The response to the program was overwhelming. Within 3 days of announcing it, they had over 200 applications. Rosa spent long hours on the phone, talking to mothers who were 3 months behind on rent, to elderly people facing utility shutoffs, to families who'd been hit with unexpected medical bills. Every phone call broke Rosa's heart a little bit. She heard herself in these voices, remembered the panic of not knowing how rent would get paid, the shame of having to choose between electricity and groceries. But now she was on the other side of that conversation, able to say words she desperately needed to hear years ago. "We can help you." The foundation approved 47 of the first 50 applications. The 3 that were denied were clear cases of fraud, people who owned property or had significant savings but were trying to game the system. Rosa felt good about those decisions, felt like they'd found the right balance between accessibility and responsibility. 2 months after the emergency assistance program launched, Rosa got a call that stopped her in her tracks. It was Mr. Jenkins, the elderly man from her old apartment building, the one who'd been choosing between medication and rent. "Miss Rosa?" His voice was shaky. "I heard about this program you're running. My neighbor told me. I didn't want to call. Felt like maybe I shouldn't since I know you and all. But I'm in a real bad spot here." Rosa's throat tightened. "Mr. Jenkins, of course you should call. Tell me what's going on." He explained that he'd fallen behind on his electric bill trying to keep up with his prescriptions. The power company had sent a shut-off notice. He had 5 days. Rosa processed his application that afternoon and had a check sent to the utility company the next morning. When she called to tell him the bill was paid, he cried on the phone. So did she after they hung up. That evening, she told her sister about it. "This is why it matters," she said. "This is why it was worth taking the risk." Her sister nodded. "You know what Mom would say if she were here?" Their mother had passed away 3 years earlier, worn out from a lifetime of hard work and worry. Rosa felt the familiar ache of that loss. "She'd say you're doing what she always wanted to do," her sister continued. "She always talked about how if she had the resources, she'd spend her time helping the neighborhood." "You're living her dream, Rosa." The foundation continued to grow. By the 6-month mark, they had a staff of 15 people. They'd helped over 300 families avoid eviction, connected 200 people with medical advocates, and enrolled 25 adults in educational programs. The numbers were good, but Rosa cared more about the individual stories. Like the single father who'd been working 3 jobs and falling further behind every month. The foundation helped him pay off some debt, connected him with job training, and within 4 months he'd landed a single job that paid more than his 3 previous jobs combined. Or the grandmother raising her grandchildren who'd been overwhelmed trying to navigate the special education system. The foundation provided her with an advocate who helped her understand her rights and get her grandson the services he needed. These stories kept Rosa going during the hard days, and there were plenty of hard days. Days when the funding wasn't coming in as fast as they needed. Days when programs didn't work as planned. Days when she made decisions that turned out to be wrong and had to figure out how to fix them. She also had to learn to manage people, which was harder than she'd expected. The foundation had hired 2 caseworkers to help with the emergency assistance program, and both of them were older than Rosa and had social work degrees. One of them, a woman named Carol, clearly resented taking direction from someone she saw as less qualified. It came to a head 3 months in, when Carol openly contradicted Rosa's decision in a team meeting. Rosa had approved an application that Carol thought should have been denied, and Carol made her opinion known in front of everyone. After the meeting, Patricia pulled Rosa aside. "You need to address this directly with Carol. If you don't establish your authority now, it's only going to get worse." Rosa knew Patricia was right, but the conversation she needed to have terrified her. She spent 2 days rehearsing what she'd say before finally calling Carol into her office. "I understand you disagreed with my decision on the Thompson application," Rosa started, trying to keep her voice steady. Carol crossed her arms. "I think the application should have been denied. The family has other options they haven't explored." "What other options?" Rosa asked. Carol listed several programs and resources. On paper, they made sense. But Rosa had spoken to Mrs. Thompson directly, had heard the exhaustion in her voice, had understood the barriers Carol couldn't see from a case file. "Those programs all have waiting lists of 3 to 6 months, Rosa explained. "Mrs. Thompson needs help now, not in 6 months. Yes, she should apply to those programs and we'll help her do that. But while she's waiting, she needs to keep a roof over her children's heads." "We can't help everyone who needs immediate assistance," Carol argued. "We have to have standards." "You're right, we do have to have standards," Rosa agreed. "And our standard is that we help people who genuinely need help and don't have other immediate options. Mrs. Thompson qualifies." Carol looked like she wanted to argue more, but Rosa held up her hand. "I respect your expertise, Carol, I really do. You have education and experience I don't have. But I also have something you don't have. I've been Mrs. Thompson. I've been the person with a caseworker telling me about programs I could apply to while I'm trying to figure out how to feed my kids this week. Theory and practice are different things." Carol's expression softened slightly. "I'm not saying my way is always right," Rosa continued. "I'm going to make mistakes, and when I do, I need you to tell me. But I need you to trust that I'm making the best decisions I can with the information and experience I have, and I need you to respect my authority, even when you disagree with me." They didn't become best friends after that conversation, but they reached a working understanding. Carol was still skeptical sometimes, but she stopped openly challenging Rosa's decisions. The Foundation's first anniversary celebration was held in a community center in one of the neighborhoods they served. Mr. Vanderberg flew in from Europe for it. He'd visited several times over the year, checking on progress. But this was the first time Rosa had seen him since those early days in the hotel penthouse. He looked the same, maybe a little grayer at the temples, but still with that same assessing gaze. When he saw Rosa across the room, his face broke into a genuine smile. "You've exceeded every expectation I had," he told her when they had a moment to talk privately. "And I had very high expectations." Rosa felt herself blush. "We still have so much work to do. There are so many people we haven't been able to reach yet." "That's the sign of a good leader," he said, "always seeing what's next rather than resting on what's already been accomplished. But tonight, take a moment to recognize what you've built here." He gestured around the room, which was full of people, staff members, community partners, families they'd helped, local politicians who'd started to take notice of their work. "A year ago, you were cleaning hotel rooms. Tonight, you're running a foundation that's changing lives. That's not a small thing, Rosa." Later that evening, several families got up to speak about how the foundation had helped them. Rosa listened to Mr. Jenkins talk about how the assistance with his electric bill had been a turning point, how it had given him breathing room to figure out other solutions. She heard Mrs. Thompson talk about how the foundation had kept her family together when they were on the edge of losing everything. She heard a young woman, probably in her early 20s, talk about how the Foundation's educational support program had helped her finish her degree while working full-time. "Miss Rosa told me something when I wanted to quit," the young woman said, looking directly at Rosa. "She said that education isn't about proving you're smart, it's about giving yourself options. That changed how I thought about everything." Rosa barely remembered saying that, but apparently it had mattered. After the celebration ended and most people had left, Rosa found herself alone in the community center with Mr. Vanderberg. They sat in folding chairs, both of them tired but satisfied. "Can I ask you something?" Rosa said. "That first day in the hotel when you started speaking Dutch, was that really a test?" He smiled. "Yes and no. I was genuinely frustrated with the service at the hotel, and I do sometimes test people by creating language barriers. But I wasn't testing you specifically. I didn't know you existed until you walked into that suite. And if I hadn't known any Dutch at all? If I'd just called for a translator or walked away? Then I would have found someone else to invest in, he said simply. There are good people everywhere, Rosa. People with potential, with heart, with the ability to lead if someone gives them a chance. You happen to be the person I met that day, and I'm grateful for that. But don't think you're the only person capable of this work. There are hundreds of people in this city alone who could do what you're doing if they had the resources and support. Rosa thought about that. So what makes me special? You said yes, he replied. You were terrified, you doubted yourself. You knew all the reasons why you might fail. But you said yes anyway. That's what makes you special. Not your potential, but your courage to act on it. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. What's next for you? He asked. The foundation is stable now, running well. You could stay here and maintain what you've built, or you could think bigger. Bigger how? This model works, he said. We've proven it here. What if we replicated it in other cities? What if you trained other people to do what you're doing? Helped them start their own foundations in their own communities? Rosa felt that familiar flutter of fear and excitement. A year ago, that would have seemed impossible. But now, after everything she'd accomplished, it seemed like maybe, just maybe, it was something she could actually do. Let me think about it, she said. He nodded. Take your time. But Rosa, remember that the girl cleaning hotel rooms a year ago never imagined she'd be running a foundation. Don't let your current position limit your vision for what you could do next. Rosa went home that night and stood in the doorway of the apartment she still shared with her sister and her niece. She could afford her own place now, something nicer, but she'd chosen to stay. To save the money, yes, but also because this was home. This was where she came from, and she never wanted to forget that. Her sister was asleep on the couch, the baby in a crib nearby. Rosa covered her with a blanket and then went to her own room. She sat on her bed and pulled out her phone, scrolling through photos from the evening, pictures of smiling faces, of families who'd been helped, of community members who now had hope where before they'd had none. One photo showed her shaking hands with Mr. van der Berg, both of them smiling at the camera. She stared at that photo for a long time, thinking about everything that had changed since that morning in the penthouse suite when she'd responded to a stranger in Dutch. One moment, one choice, one conversation. That's all it had taken to change everything. Rosa set her phone down and looked around her small room. Tomorrow she'd think about expansion plans and training programs and bigger visions. But tonight, she just wanted to sit with the gratitude of where she was, what she'd accomplished and who she'd helped along the way. She'd started this journey as a hotel maid who tried to be kind to a difficult guest. She'd ended up becoming someone who could offer others the same chance she'd been given, the opportunity to build something better, and that, she realized, was worth more than any salary, any title, any recognition. The real reward was knowing that she'd used her second chance to create second chances for others. That was what mattered. That was what would always